My name is Laurentier. I'm a senior consultant with AKRA Team, and I generally focus on quality and regulatory issues for a lot of our customers. And I really enjoy helping people clarify quality requirements because I don't think they should be that scary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, my name is Sean Gibbons. I work at Philips. I'm a regulatory affairs manager. Specifically, I focus in software as medical device, cloud-based AI machine learning algorithms. And I was asked to give a quick statement that any comments made today are based on my own opinions and experience and do not reflect the position or views of Philips and its entities.
Thank you for that. And Matteo?
Hello, everybody. My name is Matteo D'Angelo. I am project handler, lead auditor, and technical documentation assessor at TÜV SÜD. I'm authorized for the main relevant schemes regarding medical devices, clearly including MDSAP. My main area of work in TÜV SÜD is related to non-active medical devices, in particular orthopedics. I started to work in TÜV SÜD in 2022, but before that I worked for several years at a large Italian company that relies implantable device and surgical instruments for orthopedics. I'm very excited to participate in this webinar. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us. Lawrence, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean. So welcome again to the webinar on MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, navigating multi-regulatory harmonization while avoiding the most common compliance pitfalls that cost companies market access. What you will see and hear today includes information from published documents, as well as the opinions and interpretations of myself and the two guest speakers. So please take note of this disclaimer. And we've already introduced our guest speakers today, Matteo and Sean. For today's agenda, we will discuss the background and history of MDSAP, give you a sense of the structure and scope of the program. We will talk about the key defining features like the structure and grading scheme and how it differs from other audits. And then we will have a panel discussion with our two guest speakers. We'll talk about common pitfalls, get some insight from the industry, from both the perspective of a manufacturer and auditor. And after that, we will have time for some questions from the audience. So let's start with a little background to give you some context if you are not familiar with MDSAP. What is the Medical Device Single Audit Program? The original intention was to create a single audit that, if conducted, could satisfy the needs of more than one regulatory jurisdiction. In other words, instead of having separate audits for every single region, what if there was a way to somehow combine them? So the clue is in the title, MDSAP, Medical Device Single Audit Program, one audit to rule them all. And they were not trying to make the regulations the same. That would be incredibly challenging. Instead, what they focused on creating was a unified auditing method that would at least reduce the number of different audits needed and therefore save time for both those performing the audits and those being audited. So it was very much driven by a desire to create an efficient and effective program. Now, who is this they I keep referring to? So it started with the GHTF, Global Harmonization Task Force, which eventually dissolved, but the work was continued in 2011 or 2012 by a working group under the IMDRF, International Medical Device Regulatory Forum, which I believe involved at the time the 5 countries that eventually joined MDSAP, as well as China, Europe, Japan, and Russia. And so they formed a sort of international consortium, MDSAP. And they have a Regulatory Authority Council, RAC, in the diagram on screen, which consists of the regulatory authorities from the 5 countries that signed on: Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, and the US. these are the 5 countries in which the regulatory authorities accept this single audit approach. The MDSAP consortium also has official observers from the EU, Singapore, United Kingdom, and the World Health Organization. And they also have affiliate members from 7 other countries across several continents. Now, these observers and affiliate members, they participate to varying degrees. They're on the periphery. They cannot make decisions about the program, but they can participate in working groups. They can witness assessments and participate in forums. In fact, they just recently had a forum in Amsterdam where many stakeholders gathered, and they talked about how the program is working, potential changes in the future, and so on. My interpretation is that they're at least curious about the success of the program and may one day consider it. Now, when they launched the program in 2014, the EU said they would make a decision about full participation in a couple of years. And I remember when I was getting trained on MDSAP in 2017, my trainer said that they wouldn't join any sooner than 2020 at the earliest. But soon after, as you all know, the EU regulations were being introduced, MDR and IVDR, and they clearly went in a completely different direction. But at the recent forum, there was some discussion about the potential benefits of them joining in the future. Now, just as a side note, there is a tiny way in which an MDSAP audit report could be of use in the EU regulatory context, but it is certainly not as significant as the worth of an MDSAP audit report in the 5 jurisdictions. So what are the requirements in scope? Well, we have the international standard for QMS for the medical device industry, ISO 13485. And for the participating countries, we have these main sources of requirements, the regulatory requirements in each jurisdiction. During the implementation of MDSAP, ISO 13485-2016 had just come out, replacing the 2003 version. And I think this happened sometime during the MDSAP pilot. Now it's 2025, so the 2016 version has been in place for a long time, and manufacturers are well acquainted with it. But this will need to be revisited whenever the next version of ISO 13485 comes out. Just a couple of weeks ago, the planned 5-year review was closed. So in a few months, they may announce the outcome of the review. At the bottom of the slide, it also says specific requirements for the authorities participating in the program. So basically, there are some other requirements. For example, 21 CFR Part 807, which is about established registration, device listing, or 21 CFR Part 803 about medical device reporting. These are additional requirements that are not in 21 CFR Part 820. But nevertheless, they're still applicable. Let's talk about the stakeholders. So we have the regulatory authorities from each participating jurisdiction, and they are responsible to assess, and if the criteria are satisfied, they will recognize auditing organizations, and they will continue to monitor their performance through witness audits and documentation reviews. Then, from the device manufacturer's perspective, they would apply to an auditing organization to participate in MDSAP. This is how they would get an audit performed. And based on this, the auditing organizations may communicate with regulatory authorities. They'll let them know that, hey, this manufacturer is going to undergo an MDSAP audit, and this is how the regulatory authority knows that they do not need to proceed with their usual audits. This is one of the ways that MDSAP allows device manufacturers to save time. After conducting audits and working with manufacturers to resolve any nonconformities, the auditing organizations will share results with the regulatory authorities, along with a recommendation for certification or not. And then based on this, the regulatory authorities can use this information as part of their own process to grant a marketing authorization in their jurisdiction. Now, this last point is important because the audit performed as part of MDSAP does not replace whatever market authorization activities are applicable in each of the 5 jurisdictions, right? The current product approval pathways are still relevant. MDSAP only replaces the routine auditing aspect. And I should also mention that MDSAP does not let manufacturers get out of open issues. If you have nonconformities from a previous regulatory audit in one of those 5 jurisdictions and they've not been resolved, they must still be closed out with that jurisdiction. So applying for MDSAP is not a sort of get out of jail free card where you can forget the results of previous and then move on to a new audit program. There is this MDSAP audit cycle, which goes over a 3-year long period. So at the start would be the initial certification audit. This would be followed by a surveillance audit in each of the following 2 years and a recertification audit in the year after that. So the result of each audit could be initial certification, continuing certification, or recertification, depending on where you are in this cycle. In the initial certification audit, there are 2 stages. Stage 1 is a documentation review. It's to determine if the necessary QMS documentation has been prepared and if the organization is in general prepared to proceed with the process. It also lets the auditors get ready for the on-site audit that will happen in stage 2. It'll let them know what to focus on so they can save a lot of time during the site visit. So the stage 2 audit is the thorough evaluation of all applicable requirements from what I said before, ISO 13485 and the relevant regulatory requirements, and takes place at all sites that will be recorded on the certificate. For surveillance audits, they check for the continuing compliance and effectiveness of the QMS. And each surveillance audit does not necessarily need to cover all the requirements that you covered in the initial certification audit. They will typically focus on changes to the organization, like newer updated products, technical documentation related to their products, or changes to your QMS processes. Surveillance audits also focus a lot on issues related to safety and effectiveness that emerged since the previous audit. So we're talking about things like complaints, vigilance reports, any sort of field corrections or recalls. Keep in mind that terminologies and reporting timelines do vary between jurisdictions. For surveillance audits, there's typically no stage 1, although there could be if there were huge changes, such as, I don't know, major changes to regulatory requirements, for example. And finally, we have the recertification audit, which goes through all the areas of the QMS. There are more details about this, but this is I think a general overview of the audit cycle. And outside of the cycle, there are also audits like special audits. So these could be conducted to fill in gaps between surveillance audits. Maybe there was some product safety issue that emerged, and the regulatory authority wanted the auditing organization to investigate, for example. Or maybe there were major nonconformities that needed to be followed up on site. Or maybe there was an issue with one of the audits and they needed to redo a portion of the audit because they couldn't complete all the tasks in the time available. Maybe an auditor got sick or something. Or there was some other obstacle on site. And another thing, there are also unannounced audits. which are when regulatory authorities need auditing organizations to follow up on previous significant nonconformities. And alternatively, regulatory authorities can do it themselves. They could conduct their own audits for a cause. They have a specific reason. Maybe they want to follow up on something or just double check that everything has been implemented. Let's talk about the audit process itself. Perhaps the most important document that manufacturers would need to reference is the MDSAP audit approach document. I have the document ID there on the screen, and we'll provide links after this. This document includes specific instructions about how the auditing organizations perform the audits in this program. When MDSAP launched, there used to be two separate documents, one called the MDSAP Audit Model, and another was the MDSAP Companion document. In case you come across these documents or these names, just know that they have now been combined into one. Figure 1 from this document is what you see on the screen here. So the MDSAP audit approach follows this process-based approach where they've grouped audit tasks into 4 primary processes: management, measurement, analysis, and improvement, design and development, and production and service provision. Then there is the supporting process of purchasing, as well as 2 additional supporting processes: device marketing authorization and facility registration, and medical device adverse events and advisory notices reporting. And the arrows in this diagram represent links between all of these sections. This is because there are a lot of links between these areas in a QMS. It's a fundamental aspect that a lot of requirements are intertwined and related. So when you think about one area, you may end up interacting with another part of the QMS. Purchasing, for example, is a supporting process that has important links to measurement, design and development, and production and service. So you might confirm that a purchasing requirement has been implemented when auditing another section. The MDSAP audit approach document explicitly mentions these links to help you navigate them. At the top of the diagram, you see risk management, and it surrounds the other main processes. This is to emphasize the fundamental nature of risk management and how it is considered throughout the audit. If you have excluded design development from your scope or deemed certain requirements not applicable due to the nature of the device or how the organization operates, that is carried over, and the auditing organization would not audit those requirements as they remain outside your scope. Although it is presented as a sequence, they won't always be able to strictly follow this order, especially if you have multiple auditors auditing in parallel. But this is the general sequence of activities, and it's a helpful way to look at the processes and how they're related. We don't have time to look at the audit tasks in detail today, but I would encourage you to look at the MDSAP audit approach document if you haven't already. And it clearly shows each requirement from ISO 13485 and the associated regulatory requirements from each jurisdiction. Another one of the defining features of MDSAP is the grading scheme. This is an excerpt from another of the MDSAP documents, AU P0037.002. There are 4 criteria, and for each one, the auditor applies a score based on the outcome. So for example, number 1, is there an indirect or direct impact on medical device safety and performance? So here we're saying if the issue is with something like management responsibility or commitment, the quality policy, responsibilities, management review, these have indirect impact on the device. Whereas if the issue is in something like product realization, anything from design to post-market, that would have a direct impact. So if it was a direct impact, for example, you would give it a score of 3. Then the second one is it a repeat issue? Has it occurred in audits from the last 3 years? If yes, at a score of 1. Was there no document procedure, or was a required activity? Was there a required activity that was not performed? If yes, give it a score of 1. And finally, did it actually lead to the release of any non-conforming device? Now, if you do the math quickly, you realize that you can end up with a maximum score of 6, but as a rule, they've capped the score at 5. And again, there are more details about this grading scheme in the document ID that's listed on the screen there. So in summary, some of the benefits of MDSAP include the fact that there's no additional requirements for manufacturers. You still only need to consider the current requirements for the countries as well as ISO 13485. It is a single audit, which theoretically lets you use less time and resources to prepare for and undergo audits. There's a routine audit cycle, so that everything is scheduled in advance, and there's that predictability of the structure, the sequence of activities, how long you spend on each activity. And finally, there is a chance that more regions will join the program. At the beginning, there was all this excitement at the launch about an increase in the number of participating regulatory authorities, and I think that's probably something that a lot of manufacturers would look forward to as well. So that is a quick overview of MDSAP in the amount of time we have. We will include some links here for some resources that might be helpful. You can access them after the webinar. And now I think we will jump to a short audience poll. Sean, do you have that ready? Excellent.
Yes, you should be seeing it now, hopefully.
So you guys can just go ahead and complete the poll. And while we wait for the audience, let's bring in our guest speakers. So once again, we have Matteo D'Angelo, project handler and lead auditor from TÜV SÜD, and Sean Gibbons, regulatory affairs manager from Philips. So why don't we start with you, Matteo? In your experience with an auditing organization, I don't know, do you have a preferred MDSAP chapter that you like to audit the most?
Oh, well, definitely the manufacturing process, because I enjoy seeing and getting hands-on with how devices are actually made, observing the production step, the different applications, and how companies structure their controls, including process validations. Of course, this is just my personal opinion and not specifically related to MDSAP. For me, it applied to any scheme, clearly. But it is anyway clear that with MDSAP, very structured approach, the production session become even more exciting because you enter the production area already aware of what most relevant to look at, because you have performed before a lot of, you have already inspected the management process, the measurement analysis process, and therefore you have to collect a lot of information to know what you have to see in production.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is always one of the most exciting parts of the audit when you get to check out the manufacturing space. And I know you often see people like, do you ever wonder if they've like cleaned up the area a lot more just because you're arriving?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely one of the most exciting parts. How about Sean, from your perspective, do you have a least favorite MDSAP chapter? Maybe something you don't like preparing for?
Fair question. I will say it's a bit of a cop-out answer for regulatory, but definitely the adverse event reporting falls in that least favorite bucket. Any company doesn't want to be in that position, so when you actually have to use those procedures, it's never a fun day. And then for auditing purposes, I find that a lot of companies have a lot of questions around the different requirements for each jurisdiction. What do you consider your become aware date? What do we do with new information? How are we reporting everything? And making sure that information flows correctly to all the right regulators in a timely fashion is definitely a struggle that many companies face. And because it's not a favorite part of any organization, sometimes they just don't always put the best resources towards there. And yeah, not the most favorite part of that audit.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. That is definitely understandable. Sean, how are we doing on the poll? Do we have
We're gonna go ahead and end the poll. Share the results really quickly. There we go. So, and back to you.
perfect? Thank you. All right, well, let's turn to our panel. And why don't we start with the theme which we had in our subtitle there about compliance pitfalls and audit findings. So this question is for both panelists. What are the 3 most frequent MDSAP audit nonconformities that result in market access delays? And what root causes typically drive these failures? Well, why don't we start with you, Matteo?
Oh, well, first of all, it is important to underline again that MDSAP does not introduce any new requirement, and it is based on ISO 13485 requirements plus the applicable regulatory requirement of the MDSAP jurisdictions. This means that it is not entirely accurate to associate findings directly with the MDSAP program, but rather we can talk about findings that emerge thanks to the MDSAP approach. The approach encourages the auditors to create many connections between the different audited processes and push sampling based on risk, complaints, incidents, non-conformities, or kappa. There is therefore a strong emphasis on the procedures that guide these processes, and it is not uncommon to issue findings on non-conformity and kappa management, as well as risk management processes. Additionally, and linking to your first question, all processes verified at the beginning of the audit, of the audit sequence, allow for very direct and specific sampling in production, often revealing findings related to inadequate quality controls or ineffective process validations. Then typical root causes include insufficient trainings, lack of resources, or typically non-robust procedures.
That's right. Yeah, that's really unfortunate when they don't have the procedures at all in the first place. Certainly seems very unprepared, right? Yeah. And what about you, Sean? What sort of frequent nonconformities do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, I think my perspective lines up a little bit with Matteo's there. Kappa management is definitely one of the top of the list. Any manufacturer who goes through kappas or anyone who has ever worked on kappas knows there's a lot of question when you do root cause analysis. How deep do you go? And then also making sure you do a left-right look to all of your procedures. So really encouraging manufacturing companies to make sure when they do kappas that they're looking deep, they're asking all the right questions. They're not just coming up with the simplest answer and implementing the first thought that comes to their mind. So kappa definitely a big one. Design control deficiencies. So when they do their V&V planning, do they make sure that they link it to their risk management procedures and the risk management file? Do they, again, double check is what they're implementing and what they test in their V&V actually covering what their risk mitigation is calling for? So following up on all of that testing. And like I stated before, adverse event reporting, making sure that you understand each one of the jurisdictions, what their timelines are, and what the expectation is for your reporting for post-market events. These are 3 that I think any manufacturer can struggle with a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those definitely sound very familiar to me as well. This next question is from Matteo. How do companies most commonly misunderstand MDSAP requirements? Do they have a misconception about the program? Is there some documentation that they could have easily prepared to avoid a nonconformity?
A frequent mistake is assuming that meeting the ISO 1345 standard is enough to ensure compliance across all jurisdictions. While ISO 1345 is a great starting point, it does not cover the full picture. Each country has its own set of specific requirements that need to be addressed, and these requirements are essential to successfully navigate through the MDSAP audit. There are several examples we can make. For example, different countries impose strict timelines for reporting product incidents or adverse events. Clearly, missing these deadlines can lead to regulatory issue and even delay in market access. Different jurisdictions introduce specific requirements for labeling, IFU content, often including language requirements. A lot of jurisdictions require companies to partner with a local agent, like FDA, for example, who act as the official interface between the company, the manufacturer, and the regulatory requirements. And this agent perform activity that vary significantly from one country to another. And then another example could be the risk classification of the products. It's not the same in each jurisdiction. It's like different country by country, and each risk classification may lead to a different conformity assessment or to a different regulatory pathway. So all these aspects, if not properly addressed, can lead to findings by the auditing organization and also significant delays in the specific regulatory pathways managed directly by the authorizer themselves. So to ensure smooth market entry and avoid costly compliance issue, it is, in my opinion, crucial to understand the specific regulatory requirements of each market and tailor the strategy accordingly. Getting these details right from the start will help the organization to navigate global regulations with confidence and avoid unnecessary delays.
That's perfect. Thank you. This next question is for both of you. If you could change one thing about MDSAP to decrease the compliance gaps, what would it be? Would you change the sequence of auditing, how long you spend on a certain task, the grading scheme? Let's start with you, Sean.
Yeah, I think anyone working in the software as medical device space, especially cloud-based, we find that because we're kind of on that cutting edge, a lot of these auditing schemes were made for more classical medical devices. So one thing I would love to see MDSAP incorporate is a little bit of tailoring of their auditing practices. So depending on the device type, especially when I'm talking about software as medical device, really making sure that they're creating some flexibility and tailoring of that audit specific to that device versus just going through chapter by chapter, kind of having that rigid scheme that may not always apply to your device. And then you have to discuss with your auditor what applies, what doesn't apply, which can create a little bit of delay in the audit as you have those discussions. Yeah, I think for me, that would be the biggest thing.
That makes sense. Yeah. How about you, Matteo? If you could change one thing.
In my view, any gaps that may be identified are not a result of the MDSAP itself. So MDSAP is an audit program. It is not a standard regulation. So the applicable requirements remain those defined in ISO along with the regulatory requirements. What truly needs to happen, in my opinion, is a greater harmonization of these regulatory requirements. That would make things easier, not only for manufacturers, but also for auditing organizations. While MDSAP doesn't change the audit framework, one of its foundational objectives has always been harmonization. And focusing on that goal could help reduce compliance gaps moving forward. It is, in my opinion, something that it was in the previous in the target, the initial targets of the program, and then we have lost along the way because now the MDSAP program is focused on the audits, on the audit structure, on the audit approach, on the fact that you can skip or you can merge 5 audits in one. But one of the targets was the harmonization.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I was always sort of pleased with how well they lined up all the requirements between jurisdictions together in the document. But you're absolutely right that there's definitely a lot of work that goes into making that happen. Let's talk about strategic benefits. Let's go with Sean. How much do companies save in terms of time and stress with this model, where you have one audit instead of separate audits? The requirements are the same, but is there a lot less headache because you have fewer audits to go through?
Right. No matter how many times you do an audit, there's always plenty of stress, plenty of planning around it, a lot of preparation. So for me in regulatory, and I know my quality team really appreciates that one complete audit versus trying to schedule the entire year out, trying to figure out budgets for travel, trying to figure out what rooms we're going to be booking, where the auditors are going to be. Who our auditors are is also a big thing, since you build a personal relationship with your auditor over time. So in terms of stress, definitely huge benefits to your regulatory quality and your other departments within the entire company. And then for just planning purposes, getting it all out of the way at one time. You can build your procedures around this audit. You can centralize your procedures so that way you have less SOPs floating around to make sure you keep updated. So that way, great centralization of those. And also another benefit to the overall organization is your response times after the audit. If I have FDA coming in, a response to a significant finding is very short, very stressful, and versus MDSAP, which buys you a little bit more time to work with your auditors to get the correct responses out and make sure that things can continue operating as normally. Final point, time. Also, whenever an audit comes around, in my perspective, company has to shut down, basically. You're preparing for this audit. You're getting everyone in the right room, setting up your front back room. That's a lot of time lost that could be spent on better activities like getting market access, making sure all your procedures are effective. So definitely a lot of stress and time savings.
Absolutely. And you have, theoretically fewer different findings, right?
Exactly.
So you can kind of like collect your time instead of having to track 5 different findings for maybe the same issue. You just have the one.
Exactly. Yes.
Cleaner for your systems. Yeah. Let's talk about the implementation and transformation. If someone was to adopt MDSAP, Matteo, actually, let's take a different perspective first. Matteo, from your perspective of an auditing organization, when MDSAP came in, how was the response from your perspective? Were there challenges with training, recruiting auditors to perform audits, that sort of thing?
Honestly speaking, I don't know, because I wasn't working for an auditing organization at the time the MDSAP was introduced. However, I can imagine that the existing auditors were used, providing them with a solid training plan, so an integration of the auditor schemes. But what I can say is that when I was authorized for this scheme, I had a very pretty intense training, but the real value came from hands-on experience in the field, because the structure of MDSAP approach is very particular, and it's very stressful for the auditor as well. And I guess that back in 2016, when Health Canada made the MDSAP certificate mandatory for accessing the Canadian market with a 2-year transition period, a lot of companies, I imagine, rushed to get certified all at once, which probably pushed the auditing organization to quickly ramp up trainings and authorizations.
What about now? Do you find other challenges with having the right auditors with the right skill sets to perform audits, or is it a pretty stable environment?
Oh, it's a typical audit where you need to be well prepared when you arrive to the company. So you need to study the company, the processes, the documentation received in advance in order to start to understand what you can sample during the inspection and the sequence of the task you would like to follow. And therefore, it is very important that the auditors has a very good organization, a very good plan. So precision, organization are typical skills of the auditors, but they are, in this case, are very important.
Right, absolutely. Sean, from your perspective, how do companies deal with the resource allocation for MDSAP? If they save time and resources, is it a challenge to justify their quality and regulatory personnel?
So I think that's going to be the first thought of any company is now we're coming down to a single audit. Great. Do we need all of these resources? Which to me, that's really a short-sighted plan. You do free your resources up to do the jobs that they're hired to do. Quality can now focus on cost saving, whether it's scrap reduction, making sure the plans for V&V are thorough so you don't have recalls in the future. And then now regulatory can focus more of their time on market access, even outside of MDSAP countries. This allows me to now look forward and plan for additional market access instead of thinking, who is my next audit coming up? What do I have to prepare for? Are procedures ready for the different reviewers that come in? So for justification of those resources, I think companies really have to be forward-looking and looking to grow and not just cutting the bottom line.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't seem to realize all the other duties that quality and regulatory personnel have. It's not just defending audits.
Right.
What about, I don't know, organizational changes or cultural shifts? Do you think there's anything like that that's necessary to navigate MDSAP implementation?
From a cultural perspective, I think that companies across the board, every department need to sign up to own their own procedures and take participation in these audits. A quick downfall for a lot of companies is they just say, okay, regulatory quality, you're audit people, you handle this whole thing, we'll see you in a few days. So definitely a cultural shift there. And then also making sure that the company is living in their quality system, making sure that they're reviewing their procedures, they're reviewing the reports that are coming out of it, and doing their management reviews to see, is it actually effective for what we're doing? Now, this is something that even if you're outside of MDSAP, you should be doing, but now you have more of a focal point. You have your planned 1-year review that everyone needs to come together and make sure that they're ready for. So I think that helps with that cultural shift as well, since pre-planned and everyone is prepared for what do we need to do to be successful.
Absolutely. Let's switch gears and talk about future-proofing and emerging technologies. This question's for both of you. What is one question you would like to have answered by the Regulatory Authority Council that is in charge of MDSAP? Is there something you want to know about future expansion plans or changes to the program, anything like that? Why don't we start with you, Matteo?
For me, the big question is definitely whether there will be an expansion to other countries. If MDSAP were to expand into Europe, for example, TÜV SÜD being both an MDR notified body and an MDSAP auditing organization could really benefit from that and offer a full service solution. That said, it all depends on how much value the European Commission would actually place on the MDSAP certificate within its own conformity assessment process. And this rationale is valid also for the other countries.
Right. What about you, Sean?
Definitely also with the MDSAP expansion, anytime that we can harmonize and for myself as regulatory, make my submissions more streamlined and easier, any company is going to be looking for that help. As I mentioned before, any auditing practices specific to software as medical device, changes cloud-based, and adopting AI practices that each one of the regulators is starting to move towards, and plans for that in the future is definitely information that would be valuable to manufacturers.
Sean, how should companies prepare their MDSAP compliance frameworks for upcoming requirements related to artificial intelligence or machine learning device oversight and algorithm validation expectations?
Yeah, so this is always a fun one, especially when you get introduced to the AI machine learning world. Definitely algorithm versioning is something that companies need to make sure they take seriously. When we're talking about software as medical device, it's very simple to make changes for engineers to go in. It's not like your typical hardware. So things can move fast. So making sure you have that versioning in place so you have an audit trail to know how your device has changed over time. Strong validation plans. There's a lot of black box mentality around AI. So making sure that your validation is very robust so you can cover all the use cases that maybe you possibly didn't even think of because of the nature of AI. And then real world performance monitoring. We always know that we try to be as robust as possible with the validation, but when it's put into real world use, there could be changes to how the device is performing. So making sure you're monitoring that very closely. And then following the typical 62304 framework. That sets a good boundary for software development, and it should be taken to heart by any manufacturer, because I think that's really how you build a successful QMS around software development. Another aspect that I think is always overlooked is data management practices. You're seeing a lot of regulators coming out with requirements for how do you collect your data, how do you store it, how do you clean it. All of those should be well defined and simple to access for any auditor if you want to have a successful implementation.
Sean Smith, how are we doing on time?
We have 10 minutes left, 9 really. And so we have a number of questions in the Q&A, 13 to be exact. And that's more than we can possibly answer in the next 9 minutes.
Sure. Well, why don't we jump into the Q&A now then?
Gladly. So let me just jump in with this question. Does MDSAP auditing organization communicate certificate suspension and withdrawal directly to regulatory authorities? Are we clear what that means?
I didn't catch that. Sorry.
Okay, does MDSAP auditing organization communicate certificate suspension and withdrawal directly to regulatory authorities? I'm not sure that the auditor spends the certificate.
I think I can answer to this question. What the auditing organization do is to recommend or not the issue or the continuation of the MDSAP certificate. And then it's up to the regulatory authorities to define what happened for this manufacturer on the market. So the auditing organization closed the activity when forward the information to the jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. So sort of. Is a nonconformity, is it a nonconformity if the company wants to participate in the MDSAP program but does not have specialists for each jurisdiction?
Does not have specialists.
I believe
mean-
you'll run into issues when it comes to the establishment registration and certification in specific regions. Top of mind, Japan, you may have to have a local authorized rep to cover your licensing. So if you're not specifically going for that jurisdiction, it may not be an issue for MDSAP. You would just leave that out of the scope of your certification. But I would definitely look at the local market, understand the regulations before you go into MDSAP so you can decide whether or not this is going to be needed for your company.
Fantastic. And this is a related question. Is it possible to take part in the MDSAP program if the company only covers, e.g., Canada and US FDA?
Yeah, absolutely. They just need to decide which jurisdictions they want, and those would be the ones that are in scope.
Exactly. So once audited for all MDSAP regions, can a manufacturer sell into that region assuming no licenses are required, i.e. Class 1 devices, and required registrations, listing, or notifications are done?
I think the key there would be the required registrations, listings, notifications, and also making sure that your sales procedures, your post-marketing requirements all follow local regulations. You should be able to start sales, but again, I would make sure you work with the local rep and understand the local requirements before you start shipments, because there are local requirements that are not covered under the MDSAP for each one of the markets.
Good, I understand. Next question. If our company is based in the USA, is already FDA registered and ISO 1345 certified, would that reduce the audit required to achieve MDSAP certification for Canada? So 1345 certified in the US, FDA registered, would it make it easier to enter Canada with MDSAP?
At the end of the day, you need the MDSAP certificate to access Canadian market in any case. For sure, if they have ISO and FDA registration, it's probably easier for them.
Mhm.
But in any case, you need to have the MDSAP certificate for Canada. And another additional information important is that if you apply for a country like Canada for MDSAP and you sell your devices also in other 1, 2, or all the other countries MDSAP, you have to apply to all of them. You cannot select just one if you sell also in the other.
And Matteo, I think what they might be looking for is is there an abbreviated audit process, which not working for notified body, I don't believe there would be an abbreviated process. It would just be you're already more confident that you have the evidence for the MDSAP certification, having your ISO 1345 certificate already. But myself as a manufacturing person, I'm not aware of a abbreviated audit process.
Nor am I. To both of you, what advice would you give to a manufacturing organizations, or tools would you recommend, without naming any proprietary tools, as an effective means to maintain compliance to regulatory requirements to the different jurisdictions?
A regulatory intelligence platform is going to be one of your best friends. You're working across multiple markets that put out multiple requirements all the time, and you have to find a way to meet these requirements, and then also how do they bridge to the other jurisdictions you're in. So definitely need to make sure your regulatory intelligence is up to date, and then your filing structure as well. I know a lot of companies move towards the EQMS. So just making sure that your files are organized, readily accessible, and that there's clear connections between your SOPs and your reports and all of your product-related documentation. You don't want to be caught digging through everything and finding out that you're missing a document because you didn't create a good traceability or organizational structure for your QMS.
Very good.
Just to add to that, I mean, to both of Sean's points are super valid. Yeah, it's not just to change your, regulations, but there's guidance documents all the time. There are white papers you can find that help you kind of walk through what are the changes and how it impacts you as a manufacturer. So I do recommend people to look up, different regulatory intelligence platforms or set up your own kind of crawlers that can collect information and feed it into your inbox whenever things come out. And for the EQMS side, absolutely. It's how often do people struggle to find the right record during an audit? And it's such a struggle. It slows the things down. The auditor starts getting anxious because he can't get information and move on. Yeah, definitely looking into the right QMS platform to store all your documents and records. And there's a whole industry out there that works on that kind of thing. So definitely that's something they should look into.
And I'm sure Lawrence would be happy to follow up with any of you that would like more specific information on how AKRA Team can help you establish that. We have about a minute left. Last question, countries who accept MDSAP certificate, example, Singapore, South Korea, do they need a specific MDSAP country and scope, or would any do, or any would do? I think I understand the question.
From my knowledge, I do not believe they specifically look for any country included. They just look for your certificate, because then they're going to incorporate it into their own QMS audits.